Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Your Spa Life show. Spa life is a lifestyle that accepts that accomplishment and harmony coexist. The spa in spa life, the SPA, is for seek power always, that power within you so that you can gather your inner wisdom and do that deeper work that you have in the world. I am so thrilled to introduce to you my special guest I have today, Trudi Lebron, who exemplifies this about really utilizing her power through her business, through her passion, and through her work in the world as a coach, a consultant. She's a speaker and also a podcaster. Trudi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks so much. I want to dive in here because one of the things that your audience is that you work specifically with millennial women of color for personal and professional development. And one of the things I love about this is that I think it's so important to look at the totality of the person, looking at, not just their work life, but how much their personal life actually affects that. And one of the things that we talk about here at Spa Life is really bringing your values and more of who you are and your authenticity into your work. How is it that you chose this group of women, this dynamic, and how is it that you looked at the big picture?
Yeah. So first, I work with women of color. I have a specific place in my heart for that population. It's what I consider my impact work. But I also work with all kinds of people. I work with men. I work with women who are not people of color. But in general, that is like a unique part of my practice, that I do work with women of color in groups that are affinity groups. So it's only women of color spaces for some of the programs. The way that I got there is because, I spent 15 years working in the nonprofit industry, working with a variety of different types of groups, doing kind of service-based work and really helping people to overcome significant barriers in their lives. And through my work experience and also my academic background in psychology and kind of human services and that kind of field, social work, I really started to learn that, people's life experiences are different and that's okay, right? Like we want to, acknowledge that people are coming to the table with different sets of kind of backgrounds and cultural contexts. And so I found that it was very important to be able to provide spaces for people to just be able to talk about their experience without fear of judgment.
Nice. And so how are you utilizing when people really embrace that aspect of themselves and they're actually able to be open? How do you utilize some of that to help people grow their business?
Yeah, it's really powerful to be able to kind of just be who you are, like show up who you are. And because you don't have to hide behind these other things. And the work that we do, and this is not just for people of color, but all people, and I know a lot of women in the workforce spaces too, when you show up and you feel like you have to present as something, like you have to kind of put on all these different masks and, be someone that you're really not at the core, that's not like how you want to be, part of your energy goes to maintaining that persona. And it means that you can't put all of your energy into actually achieving the goals that you want to achieve. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I always talk about Mario hearts. If anyone has ever played Mario Brothers, that when you start a game, you have these little hearts, and those hearts represent the energy that you have. So if you have 10 hearts and 3 of those hearts are being absorbed by just kind of putting on a persona or worrying about what people think about you, then that's 3 hearts that you don't have to kind of pour into your passion and pour into your, the things that you'd rather be pursuing. So right. That's kind of how I think of it. I really try to create spaces for people, not just for people of color, but I also work with people. I have groups where it's all white folks who are coaches. For example, I train coaches around things like equity and diversity. And so that's an affinity group in itself. And so when people can just show up as who they are and not be worried about that, then they can really put those energy hearts that they have into doing the growth and kind of, working towards the goals that they actually want to achieve.
Right. No, I love that. That reminds me, a lot of times I used to not share with people that I am a retired San Diego police officer, because there's a lot of energy around like police officers. And when I was the police officer at the time, I was also the only woman on my squad. And so there was a whole, a lot of things that happened around that. And even during the time, I would go to calls and, people would kind of look at me and go like, okay, well, when's the real police officer going to get here? Because they didn't want to deal with a female officer, or even on my own squad, having to kind of like have to prove yourself and being in situations, because I was a single mom at the time as well, and having to show up with strength and power and people expecting me to, save their life, save the situation, have things happen, but also being, worried as a mom, am I going to make my mortgage payment? Do I need to work extra overtime to take care of my kids, and the things that are happening in the background? And I think that, for women in general, to really show up and do our powerful work in the world, to embrace all the different aspects of ourselves. And I can remember those being really, scary times on many different levels, not just physically, but just who I was being in the world, and, to make sure I made it home to my kids, and just all of those things that we look at. And I think it's so important to embrace all the aspects of ourselves. So I talk about it more now. I'm really bringing it more into my work and actually utilizing it. How can women be more courageous to step out into the world? And, I feel like this is something that, you're really stepping more courageously out in the world about really helping people to, have more, diversity, and how things can be, more equal, and really looking at things that from a bigger perspective. And how did you really start? I look at like your podcast, like That's Not How It Works. I love the title of that for one. And, really, you and your co-host, are diversity and inclusive experts. And how is it that you started that podcast? How is it being received? And how can people in business really start being more inclusive and be mindful of, some things that maybe they just didn't even consider before?
Yeah. So the podcast really came out of like this fun project that me and my co-host Weeze, and we had another co-host at the time who's here locally with me in Connecticut. And we wanted to just do something fun, like a passion project. And so when the movie Black Panther came out last February, we got really excited about it, and we wanted to talk about it. And that movie has all these layers around race and gender and politics and all kinds of things, as well as just being like a cool movie. And so we were like, oh, we should just do this fun thing. So we recorded about 7 episodes all about the movie, and we kind of looked at like the gender politics of that movie and the race politics of that movie and all these other things. And we really fell in love with the medium. And then, you after 7 episodes of talking about a movie, you kind of got to decide like, what direction you're going to go in. And so me and Weeze, my co-host, we're both coaches, and we are full-time coaches, in our lives. And our other co-host, she's not a coach. She wasn't, she wasn't an entrepreneur. And so she wanted to work on other projects, and it made sense for Weeze and I to kind of stay working together and kind of transition the show into a show that was talking about like, how can we support coaches in diversifying their practices? Because, if you haven't noticed, and I'm sure you have, it's an issue. Like my dog is coming over. It's an issue. Like there are so many people being called out and called in and, identified for doing things like having all white summits, like summits or conferences or retreats or masterminds that have no diversity whatsoever. And some of these conferences and summits will have themes like, world peace, or like, empowerment of like women. And it's like, well, you're not talking about all women. You're just talking about white women. And people are being really called to the carpet about that. Right. So, and that's not the only reason why it's important. Like, it's important because it's what we should be doing. It's the way, if we're ever going to get to a place in our world, in our country, where we really have kind of equitable access to things, and where people's life outcomes aren't linked to their social identities, we have to do this work. And that's really the case right now. People's life outcomes, like their life expectancy, their education level, their health, their economic status, is really linked to their social identity, like what race they are, what language they speak, what citizenship they hold. And that's not right. Like, if we're ever going to get to a place where we just as a whole can just do better, we need to be more intentional about it. And I just feel like coaches in particular, because we do this transformative work, coaches have a unique opportunity to step in and start thinking about how they can be reaching more people and give, like, not give, but, you know, reach more people with the transformative work that they have to a broader audience and really start changing the world. I hear people all the time, I want to change the world with my work. Well, the world looks very different than, you know, one particular type of person.
Right. Well, you know, and that's how you and I, you know, connected, was at, you know, the transformational, you know, leadership retreat. Yeah. And you were, you know, the one of the guest presenters, where this conversation, you know, really opened up some eyes, not only for myself, but for people in the audience, of aspects that we just didn't necessarily think about. Right. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's kind of like business as usual, you know, wanting to have like these big altruistic, you know, visions and dreams, but what is the boots on the ground to get there, and what shifts and changes are happening, and what to do in that. So, you know, we have, I mean, our audience, you know, are entrepreneurs that are doing their business. And, you know, a lot of times I like to think that people are doing the best they can with what they know and where they're at. You know, what are some of the things that, you know, entrepreneurs who are maybe, you know, hearing this conversation, probably not for the first time, but maybe just not only having it land with themselves and their business, and how things would be different for themselves. If they don't have things in place, or maybe a lot of times people think, well, I'm a solopreneur, it's just me, right? So how is it that this shifts what I'm doing, or how I'm being, or how I can make, you know, social impact in the world? What would you recommend? What are some of the first steps? What are some of the things that people can consider and do to really have themselves be more aligned with the scope of the people they're serving and their bigger mission?
Yeah, so I think the first step is really to just take stock of yourself, right? Like take a hard, honest look at yourself and your business, and ask a few questions. Like, do the people that I serve look just like me? Like, are the majority of the people that I work with, you know, basically a profile of myself? And then, you know, start to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because you haven't intentionally reached out to other communities? Is it because, and, you know, I say intentional in a really specific way, because what I hear all the time is like, oh, well, I'm open to everyone. You know, I welcome everyone to come and work with me. But welcoming everyone isn't the same thing as saying, I am committed to serving a diverse range of people. And I am committed to creating an environment that is not just welcoming, but like open and safe, and like aware of the cultural context that, you know, that is important within the scope of work that I do. You know, taking a really hard look at that. And then taking a look at yourself and just kind of being like, well, who are the thought leaders and the coaches and the, you know, the folks that I follow, the mentors that I follow? Do they all look like me too? Like, what's up with that? Is it because I just don't know? I haven't been aware of it? Well, why is that? Like, really go into this kind of inquiry phase where you're just asking yourself, like, how is it that I have come to, you know, to the place that I am? And then you can start looking for resources. You can intentionally start seeking out teachers and coaches and mentors who are people of color, you know, and all kinds of people of color. Right. You can take a class. So we have a class, but there are lots of people who have classes around equity and understanding diversity and inclusion and unpacking your own bias. Like, that's a core part of it, is really exploring yourself. Like, what biases are you holding on to? And we all hold on to, all of us have biases, right? Right. And I equate it to like money mindset work, which is something that a lot of coaches and a lot of people, entrepreneurs, have really taken on. You know, they acknowledge that they have these subconscious connections, these patterns around money, and that those patterns influence the way that they charge, or the way that they spend, or the way that they, you know, are kind of open or live in abundance. And so it's the same thing here. It's like we all have these subconscious patterns and thoughts around race and identity and gender and all of these things. And we need to start unpacking those, and sometimes reprogramming the way that we have been, you know, consciously and unconsciously taught to think about people. So the work really starts with yourself. And then, you know, there's a series of things that you can do around accessibility and being open and creating safe communities. But that all comes after this kind of self-assessment to determine where you are. And it's not just about like, well, I have, you know, friends who are Black or friends who are Latino, like that has nothing to do with it. It's deeper than that. It's not just at a surface level. It's like really, really deep around like, what are my beliefs? Like what's there that I need to just kind of check in on.
Right, right. And I appreciate that distinction, because I think that, a lot of people do have that, well, everyone's inclusive, like, everyone's welcome. And,
right. I don't see color. That kind of
right.
stuff.
And so what are some of the things that, when you look at, what are some of the barriers that maybe other people are feeling that they don't feel welcome, right? Because if they're not there, right, then what is it that's happening around that? And, when you were talking about that, one of the things that had that came to mind as a tool that we use is bank code. And I don't know if you'd heard of this, but I'm actually going to share the link here later in the group about bank code is about having better communication with people. And so really based on their personality and who they are versus some of the, socioeconomic or some of the, the other things that we looked at before. In fact, we're actually, my partner and I are doing some training for law enforcement that we actually just got it passed to have some training in the academies to bridge the communication between communities and law enforcement about how we are communicating and what that looks like and how things are happening. And so really looking at even down to the words and the language and the things that we're saying to people. And unless we're having these kind of conversations, I could probably even say something during the interview where it lands differently for my audience or your audience, where it's like, until the awareness happens, and I invite you, if you hear me say something like that, then please say something, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
So I wanted to have, this conversation with you because you're putting this out into really having awareness is always the first step to be able to shift and make things different. So I know one of the things you talked about is, working towards woke. Explain that and how does that fit into the work?
Yeah, so working towards woke, it's this, it's really this concept that we, the word woke has kind of been adopted as this term for like being aware and being kind of like up to speed and being super conscious about our language and behavior, particularly around things, different ways that people are oppressed, right? So not just race, but all different kinds of ways. So woke just means like that you see it, you're aware of it, and you're doing the things to not be a perpetrator of those things. But what we try to say is that, woke isn't this like fixed place. Like you don't just be like, no one's ever really perfect in that, and that so we're always working towards it. We're always working towards our understanding of these issues around racism or, racism or oppression or sexism or all these kinds of things that we're always pursuing having a better understanding, and that we're always pursuing the kind of being this person who is sensitive, not just sensitive, but who understands the issues and who just does better, who behaves better, who speaks better, who's a better advocate for and kind of accomplice to people who hold those identities. So under the That's Not How That Works kind of brand, our team has a class called Working Towards Woke that's really about, the first half of the program is really about just giving people the language, because I think a lot of people don't even understand, what's happening. I have met people in the last year who have said to me they've never heard of the word white privilege. And to me, that's like, how have you never heard of that? Yeah. But they haven't. And it's not, it's not helpful to judge the person who doesn't know, right? I'm a coach, my job is to help teach them, right? Like if they want to learn, to teach them what that means, to teach them the implications of it. So the whole first half of the program is really about that. It's about understanding race, gender, oppression, how oppression works at a systems level, how it works in like an interpersonal level, unpacking bias and privilege. And then we kind of transition, so we have a 7-week program. The first 7 weeks is for everyone that's around that kind of identity piece and just understanding. And then the second half of the program is about how it applies in practice. Like, what does it mean in your business, right? So what are the things that you can do to make your company and your programs more accessible and safe? What are different equity initiatives that you can have? Like, how do you kind of frame your marketing in ways that shows that you're committed to this and that it's important to you and that you're open? How do you form relationships with people that show that you're humble and that you're, that you're committed to doing better and that you're not going to be perfect 100% of the time, but that you're open to dialogue and to getting, to getting better, towards working towards it.
Right.
So that's what that program is about.
Okay. Now, Trudi, you've mentioned several times to create business, create, environments where people feel safe. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean about that?
Yeah. So what I mean when I say that is that, in order for people to grow, they need to be in an environment where they feel comfortable, where they don't feel like they're going to be humiliated or they have to defend themselves or have to do extra work. And so for people of color, or for people who have marginalized identities who are not part of the dominant group, that means that, they don't want to have to come into a space where people are going to say to microaggress against them. And so microaggressions are these things that people say and do that over time have a real damaging psychological effect. And so, for example, one of those might be, oh, where are you from? And, someone might say, I'll give you actually a very specific example. I have a friend. She is Filipino and she grew up here in the States. And so people will ask her where she's from and she'll say that she's from Philly. And they'll be like, no, where are you from really? Like, so that's a microaggression, right? She really is from Philly. Like that's where she was born and raised, right?
Right.
But the where are you from really is kind of doing a couple of things. It's saying to her, one, we don't believe you, right? Two, you're lying. you're not telling me the truth. Three, like you're withholding information that I somehow feel entitled to. Four, that you can't possibly be from there because you're visibly not white, right? If a white person said that, no one would say, especially if a white person who did not have an accent, if they said that, it would be like, oh, like, sure, Philly, like, why not? But because she looks different, they're using that as a marker of, well, she can't possibly be from there. So there's tons of things like that, that happen on a daily basis. And people might think that it's not a big deal, like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just something that someone said. What you don't realize, or what people might not realize, is that it's not just one person. It's like happening multiple times a day to people every day of their life. And so it might just happen between two people once, but the cumulative effect on that person, there are like psychological ramifications from it.
Right. Yeah. It's funny when I was married to my, girl's dad, my last name was Gonzalez. And, I would have like my ID, like at the grocery store back in the day when you were writing checks and things, and they'd see that on there and they would always look at me twice, like, is that really your name? Or they would start speaking Spanish to me, or, there'd just be these different things that happen. And I even look like with my daughters, because they're half Hispanic and my grandkids are half Filipino, right? So just the different things that come up, culturally around that. And even with my daughter, she, dating someone of another race and their family having an issue, because of religion, of, really thwarting them even having a relationship, and I just remember her being so crushed because she'd come to me. She's like, Mom, I can't change who I am. Like, that's nothing I can fix or do differently or whatever. It's who I am. And it's like, as a parent, for one, you're just like, how do you even help a child having those experiences who are moving about in the world where, in that particular case, it was very intentional, towards her, but sometimes it's not intentional. And, I know you're a mother, right? And so it's like, how is it that you are bringing up your children to look at the world in a way that, that you can maneuver that better?
Yeah, again, like this, being in a constant state of inquiry where, because my kids will say things and I'll be like, what did you say? Like, why would you say that? And helping them to unpack. Just last night, my son said something that my 10-year-old, and he said something that I, was very stereotypical. And I said to him, well, is that always true? Like, can we think of examples where that's not true? And like, just helping him to kind of walking him step by step through that thought process. Right. He was like, oh yeah, actually that's not really true. And then, as they get older, you teach them, why those things are harmful and damaging and those kinds of things. So it's about putting yourself in a space where you're willing to kind of do that inquiry, not just with your children, but for yourself. Like,
right.
When we can train ourselves to be able to catch ourselves, like, oh, I just had that thought just ran across my head. Like, where did that come from? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Why did I think that joke was funny? That joke was not funny. Like, that was very harmful, or could be very harmful. The other thing that I'll say about, in business and especially particularly in the coaching world, there are a lot of things that we teach that are not just microaggressions, but blatant offenses. And so things around like the law of attraction, some of the teaching around law of attraction, for example, some of the teaching around money mindset stuff could be very, if you don't teach it in the right way, and if you don't teach it from a place of kind of cultural context, it could be really damaging for a person of color. I've had this experience where I've sat in rooms with coaches who have said, if you're not making enough money, or if you're poor, if you're in debt, it's like because you've manifested that for yourself. And that just ignores so much of the historical oppression and marginalization and systemic racism that has existed. Like, there have been throughout our history very intentional things that have been done in communities to keep people poor because of who they are, because of their race, because of their lack of education. And so when we say things like those kind of blanket statements around, law of attraction and things that you've manifested, it really ignores that historical context.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not beneficial. Like, and I'm not saying that there's not space for law of attraction work. There is. I teach that in my coaching practice, but through this very like culturally sensitive way. And acknowledging that we have to acknowledge that both can be true, that, we have power to change our circumstances and to kind of manifest, and that what manifestation requires also a lot of work and, all these other things.
Right.
And even though that's true, there are some situations that just are the way they are, and that both of those, we have to allow space for both of those things to be true at the same time.
Right. Right. And so, this is all about, we were talking about, we're in the very beginning about spa life, about really designing your life versus living by default. And so what are some of the ways that you're helping people? You talk about like aligning their vision with their life and what they're doing. You talk a little bit about your strategic life planning and how people are actually designing their life to be that reflection of how they want to live.
Yeah, so I am big on planning and strategy. I'm like a strategist first. When I was in the nonprofit industry, I designed programs and I got really nerdy about all that stuff. So, I love helping people through a process where they, kind of set big goals for their lives that are rooted in the values that they have for how they want to live, not based on just these like numbers or other people's definitions of success, but really their own belief for who they are, that conviction around like, this is what I stand for, this is who I am, and this is how I see myself. So setting those big picture goals. And for a lot of the people that I work with, when they get into a space with me, this is the first time where they've ever been even asked to set those goals and be believed, like without any kind of strings attached.
Right.
So, having them set those big goals, and then starting to work backwards through a process. Like, okay, so if that is the big vision for how you want to live, what elements of that vision can we create this year or tomorrow? You know what I mean? Even like tomorrow. And showing people that, you can have some of that big vision doesn't happen by just like doing all the things that you're doing now. And then one day you'll wake up and you'll have that life. That's not how it works. Like, you have to put elements in place, one step at a time. And so, right now we're like doing annual planning with everyone. So we're kind of taking out the big calendar and kind of saying, just what are the priorities around the quarter? Like, what are the 2 things that this quarter you want to put a lot of energy to? Like, what are the things, and how do those connect back to that big vision? So that every decision we make, every intentional decision is based on its connection to a bigger outcome. And that shifts us from being in a place where we're living, kind of in default, like I'm just paying the bills, I'm just doing whatever I have to do to get through this day and get through tomorrow, and maybe I can squeeze a vacation in, hopefully this year, to a mindset where we're like, I am in control. I recognize that sometimes things happen and that I'll have to adjust, and that I still have to pay the bills. And, I recognize all those things, and I'm going to take a stronger position in the way that my life works and make intentional decisions about how I'm going to spend my time and how I'm going to dedicate, energy and effort and time to these bigger goals.
Right.
So that's how it starts. It's about setting those kind of intentions and then breaking it down into like how it works on a daily basis.
I love that about you. We are kindred spirits with that. I love having the bigger vision. I love using like your values and the ways that you bring it all together. I'd love for you to speak into, you'd mentioned before about compartmentalizing yourself is damaging. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, people do it, especially women, they do it all the time. They're like, I work and I have this identity. And when I go to work, I just try to show up and not think about anything else. When I'm at home, I'm a mom, or I'm a wife, or I'm a daughter or a friend. And, then I can be the person that I really am, and that, even from a psychological perspective, that mental shift that you're doing takes up so much energy, because you have to be on, you're like performing, right? That it's damaging over time. That's how you start to lose yourself. I especially, I'm now 37. I talk to a lot of my friends who have children who say like, I forgot who I am outside of like a mom. Like, I don't even know. Some of them have older children and they're like, I feel like I have to start finding myself again. And I want to help people understand that, and not just understand, but take action so that they don't feel like they've ever lost themselves, that they can be their full selves in all of these roles and just make their job about you. Show up as who you are in your job. And if your job doesn't allow you to do that, maybe we need to talk about like finding another place for you to be that allows you to be whole all the time.
Right.
So that compartmentalizing is really damaging. It's psychologically damaging. It's physically draining. And I just think that we can do better. We have we're at a time where you can work from home and you can do all these things. Like, we have so much flexibility now in ways that we haven't before. And so I think we can get closer to a place where we can just show up as our authentic self.
Right. Well, I think it's such an important conversation, for women, because, there's a distinction here between feeling like you have to do everything, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're, being super mom and exceeding to the point of who you are, and embracing the different aspects of yourself. And it's one of the things why I'm such a big fan of the wall calendar, to really look at that big picture and to see like, how are you spending your time, and who is it that you're being, and that you don't have to be everything to all people, but you have to be all aspects of you. And so I love that distinction of really looking into that, is to give ourselves permission and to also allow it to not be perfect. I mean, I can remember even when I started like with the show, and it was just like, I felt like I had to have certain nuances or certain things. And it's like, you know what? People are forgiving. It's like, they actually are okay if, you mess up a few things or whatever. It's just like, we're being who we are and having these conversations. And I think particularly as an entrepreneur and as an entrepreneur woman, sometimes you can feel isolated in your own box, which is why we're having these conversations of, what can your business look like? Who are you attracting? Who are the people you're associating with, and what are you doing? Because if you just have you and your computer in a business, you are kind of in a bubble, right? And so you're isolating yourself, which has a whole nother aspect of who you're being in the world.
And that's why it's important to have communities where you can just kind of check out. The community I was talking about earlier, that's millennial women of color. It's called BeABoss. Right now, the program happens in person. So it's, in Connecticut, we're actually doing work to bring it online and to expand it and all that because of the interest. But there is something very powerful about being together on a regular basis, making, it's like a Saturday morning once a month. So having to like get yourself up and show up, not just for you, but because you know that there's a community of women who need you to be there, to just kind of say like, man, I had a tough week this week, or this month was really hard, or to celebrate the wins with you, in a way that, people at work don't understand, because you can't say at work, like, you don't know what the kids have put me through like this month. You don't know like, how hard it is. You need those spaces to just kind of be able to be all parts of yourself at once.
Right. Well, I love how you're consciously creating your life and your business. And one of the things I love to ask my guests, because how our environments affect us in such a big way. I mean, how we are in our bedroom versus our kitchen and our family room are all very different. So what is your favorite room in your home and why?
My favorite room, it might be the kitchen, because I can't work in the kitchen. I mean, I cook in the kitchen. That's different work. But the kitchen is like the one place that I don't work. And so, when I'm in there, I can just like cooking is like a therapy for me. Like I can kind of like just, focus on that. I'll play a podcast, listen to some music. Even when I'm cleaning, I just kind of like put something on in the background and just like kind of all the things fade away. But I probably work in just about every other room in the house. We recently moved in October. We moved into a new office space. We have 1,000 square foot like office that we're calling the workshop. We're building a podcasting studio in there. We have all our live workshops in there. And that's becoming one of my favorite places to be, because it's just the energy that like, even when I'm in there by myself, it's almost like the events that we've put on, there's like this kind of energy that has been left behind, and it's very creative and just kind of calm. So I'm loving that space too.
Nice. How fun. Well, I'm looking at our time here. We could probably talk for hours longer. And I know that our listeners are going to want to connect with you and get more of the resources that you have. And I know you have a free gift for our listeners.
Yeah. So in the spirit of the new year and kind of planning and annual planning, I have the annual impact planner. And in there's a guide for some instructions for just my recommendations for how to start planning your kind of big picture year. And I always start with vacations first. So plug in your break time, and then let everything else kind of come around that. So that is something that the impact planner is something that that I'm sharing in the spirit of the new year, really encouraging people to set some big goals, and then narrowing them down into like kind of quarterly things that you're just going to take on really, in a real dedicated way this year.
Oh, perfect. That's going to be great. And we are going to put all that information in the show notes so that you'll be able to get that and have all the information to stay in contact with Trudi, to be able to support you on your entrepreneurial journey. And I also have a free gift for you, just reminding me back when we were talking about bank code. I actually have a link for you guys to go to. It's called mybankcode.com/victory. And in 90 seconds, you will actually be able to get your personality code so that people can communicate with you more on the qualities of who you are, and start utilizing this tool. And it'd be great to know what it is for yourself, as well as for your family, your coworkers, and people around you, so that we can start communicating on different kinds of languages to actually feel heard and listened to. So you can go to mybankcode.com/victory for that and get all the links with Trudi and myself. So Trudi, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, so I'll just, again, in the spirit of the new year, and all of the work that I do, I just want to remind people to, do the work and try to embrace the work that makes you uncomfortable, because on the other side of that discomfort is growth.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much for everything you're doing in the world, and just really making a stand, not only for women, but for entrepreneurs, and to have everyone feel inclusive. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your work, and I thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So listeners, thank you so much for your most valuable resources, your time of spending it here with us. We would love for you, whether you are watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or any of the channels that you are doing, first of all, to subscribe, because as we build community, we get the word out and have these kind of conversations. So please share this, tag people, get it out there. And I would love for you to put in the comments, what is something that you learned differently? What is something that you're going to act on? What is something that you're going to really the show embraced for you? And I'd love for you to tag both Trudi and myself any questions that you have, because we want to answer those questions for you. We want to stay in community. We want to help continue this conversation, and we do that through your support with the comments to be part of that. So I just want to thank you again for being part of the show, and until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now.
Bye.